We're going live. Okay, amazing. We're live after all these technical difficulties. But as mentioned, like I feel like the bigger the guest, the more technical difficulty there is. So hi Ian, welcome to Venture with Grace today.
Hi, thank you for having me. Inauspicious start to start late, but we're here.
We're here. Anyway, so let's start with why don't we chat about like your how you grew up in Ohio and then you obviously wrote a love letter to Akron, if I pronounce it correctly. But
Akron.
okay, let's start with how you grew up and what drives you as a person.
So I wrote that when LeBron left Akron to go to Los Angeles, left the second time. And growing up in Ohio is a special place. I think there's actually a quote from I think the Wright brothers biography that was, if I could wish something for anybody, it's have a loving mother, a loving father, and be lucky enough to be born in Ohio. That's my paraphrase, but it was a great place to be from. And growing up in Akron, particularly at the time that I was there, I went to a great public school. I had amazing teachers who, my chemistry teacher in particular, really gave me a love for science, and I took that, and my parents too. Just in terms of the background there, my mom was a child psychologist. My dad was a litigator, a trial lawyer at Jones Day. So in our household, those are two pretty opposite ends of the spectrum growing up. You've got stats and stories. And, our dinner table conversations were basically defending an argument or a position or understanding things. And as it turns out, I think all of that, plus the science background, which ultimately led me to go to MIT, kind of was a good crucible for being in venture capital, since we're trying to understand people really well at the early stage, but also understand technology and markets. Incidentally, it's like when I encounter other people in the venture business, a lot of them have similar stories of having come out of the Midwest. Oftentimes, they're in my case, I'm the second generation in my family to go to college. My parents were the first. But you kind of grow up with some grit.
I wonder when you were so like I guess like since you started out in venture very young, I believe like right after college in Boston, and after that you created your own company. I wonder like who is on your personal board of advisors when it comes to career development.
So I mean, I was really lucky when I came out of graduate school out of Columbia. I was introduced to Alan Patrikoff when I was 26. And you could not ask for a better mentor. Alan at the time, I think he was 71. He's kind of ageless. He's 89 today. And he still comes into the office and he has the energy and presence of somebody who's in their 60s. He ran the New York City Marathon last year. So I was really fortunate to have him as a mentor, and he was so gracious with his network and advice and feedback. So he was kind of number one on my personal board of advisors. I was also in undergrad, I was a research assistant for a professor named Peter Temin, who was kind of foundational in this emerging field of cliometrics, which is taking modern econometrics tools and applying them to history. And it was, for me, really interesting to study things like, would the Great Depression have been solved sooner if the Fed did A instead of B? And, that he was a very important mentor of mine as I was thinking about where to go after college. And then in graduate school, I was the teaching assistant for Glenn Hubbard. And Glenn has been a great mentor too, and an advisor. And I think Glenn actually introduced me to Alan. So we have that connective tissue too.
I wonder when you're thinking about, so like, actually this is a second story. I've heard that like a very successful fund that's kind of founded by a someone who is like very experienced, and then they pick someone who is younger and then kind of like teach them all the craft. And then I wonder um how, like, I guess like couple questions there. Like when you first started, like when you guys first started Greycroft, what were the fundamental thesis that you guys have? And on this other podcast, I heard about like there's three generation of like different investment zone. Like at the beginning, you guys invest in media. You talk about like investing in Thrive and investing in, basically like the BuzzFeed founder and like Buddy Media sold to another company, all that kind of stuff. And then there's like a second generation Shift, and then there's like a third generation. The second generation, I believe it was like you guys invest in like trunk club, and then there's like the consumer economy, and then some or fashion economy, because of Amazon was not like tapping into these like fashion related things. And I wonder like overall, because it's been like, I guess like 18 years of like the great craft journey, like how do you separate them into like a couple different stages? And then like at the beginning, how do you think, oh, we're gonna like compete with like all these like tier one firms in Silicon Valley, and like how does it become like such a strong kind of like fund today?
I love this question. Um, we don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about what other people are doing. And when we started Greycroft in '06, it had nothing to do, or it was not at all in response to other venture capital firms. It was just based upon where we saw opportunity. And and we were also like a major beneficiary of good timing. So I've got to reckon that, in '06, when we closed our first fund, the final close was, I think, September or October of '06.
Mhm.
The next, like, 30 days later, Amazon launched AWS, right? Which at the time was called Elastic Cloud Compute. But the idea was, you get all the on-prem software was going to start being built for this. You could see it.
Mhm.
And a couple months after that, Apple launched the iPhone. We didn't
Mhm.
know that this was coming
Mhm.
when we started Greycroft, and it wasn't part of our PPM or the story. The story at that time was there were a lot of consumers who were spending an increasing amount of time online.
Mhm.
We thought that the advertising world was lagging, so that there was going to
Mhm.
be an opportunity to buy beachfront property of these great consumer sites
Mhm.
that were growing fast, and that it would be a high growth area to deploy capital, and that the business models would be ultimately really capital efficient because we were running a small amount of capital at the time.
Mhm.
And when you get into the water and you start meeting with companies, you figure out, well, like, this is really deep. Like, we can
Mhm.
go social media, launch all the mobile apps, and the entire, like, mobile application software industry exploded. And then the entire cloud application software industry exploded. So we happen to be at the epicenter of probably the two greatest wealth creation trends of the last 20 years. Um, and we were there with capital. So, you can't get better than lucky. But
Mhm.
we were in the right place, and we did have a view about kind of the internet and how that was impacting consumer behavior and enterprise behavior that at the time I think was uncommon. And when you look back at that period, Khosla had just launched or recently launched, I think Lux in New York and some other funds, and they were doing clean tech and nanotech and
Mhm.
hard science, trying to figure out where the world was going to go after
Mhm.
the internet bubble and the demise.
Mhm.
And we were actually going right back into the internet, and that was somewhat contrarian.
Mm. I think so. Like when I was like listening back to your interviews, that you were talking about like you guys, why didn't you guys do like clean tech, or why you pick like you felt like Stitch Fix is better than Run the Runway, and like all that kind of stuff. I feel like it was a lot of um forward thinking. I wonder, when you're thinking about today's climate, like where do you identify as like a big wave right now, in terms of like, last year or like 2 years ago it was crypto, right now it's AI. Like it it feels like a strong hype cycle from like from my personal perspective. And I'm sure like there's a lot of like amazing technology coming out of it. But I wonder like when you're identifying like the investing opportunities, like what are some factors that you would factor in to see if something is worth investing and then see
Mm.
if something is worth for you to like compete and win?
Uh, I'm going to actually tie this to your first question that you asked about Ohio for a minute,
Mhm.
which is like there's a thread in here. So growing up, I'd go to Summit Mall, which was our local mall, and they would pull kids aside and they would have us watch commercials that hadn't gone in broadcast yet, like, as a panel, because Ohio, as this middle America place, was representative. Like, if it works there, it will work everywhere. And I think about this a lot. Like, would it pass the Ohio test? Like, is this something that the rest of America is going to use and understand? And can I contextualize what we're looking at? Or is this just a really fringe behavior that's being used by the 1% and won't extend beyond? And that, from my upbringing, I think is really important. And it's a valuable barometer of what is going to work. So when you ask about these trends, crypto and I think about all of that as software. It's vastly simplified, but
Mhm.
there's a lot going on in software. There's also quantum, there's spatial compute, there's infrastructure, but software will be, by and large, a major investable trend for the next couple of decades. No doubt, I would discourage anybody from shorting kind of broad software growth. It has
Mhm.
been happening for the last 4 decades, and it will continue.
Mhm.
Where we play within software will change every couple years based upon innovation and interesting businesses and what's coming. Um, and we've got a team that helps navigate this. You have to go out and do empirical work. So I think this is also an important distinction. I can't sit in a dark room and pull the shades and dream up the future. You have to actually go and test it and meet with a lot of people, which is why venture tends to be a hand-to-hand combat business. We're in New York and we're in LA and we're in San Francisco. We have 3 offices because those are the ecosystems where there's top technical talent, and the top technical talent generally understands the state of the possible.
Mhm.
You spend with them talking about, like, I could build this, have it in market in 6 months, and they try to figure out, like, well, who's going to buy it and where they're going to spend, and et cetera. That is one of kind of 4 main trends. This is
Mhm.
Ian's opinion and view. I'm terrible at
Mhm.
prognosticating, so this is not Nostradamus from on high, but I think there's kind of 4 big trends over the next 10 years. Software is one, life sciences is the second.
Mhm.
Greycroft today does not play in life sciences, but it appears to me from all I can read that there's an evolution underway in biotech driven
Mhm.
by many of the same trends that we're seeing in software. But between CRISPR and gene editing and the application of artificial intelligence to drug discovery, there's a lot going on. I think
Mhm.
it's going to be a great place to deploy capital. The third is consumer products. And there's a lot happening. Consumer 70% of US GDP.
Mhm.
There's constant innovation in consumer products through novel formulations and material science. And demand can be fickle, but I also promise you, like, I don't know what computer I'll be using in 100 years or what phone I'll be using in 100 years, but I think 100 years from now, people will still be drinking Coca-Cola,
Mm.
or a product that they make.
Mm.
It's just people will still be using Heinz ketchup. That I can promise you, because it's like in the DNA of my family. My great grandchildren will be consuming Heinz ketchup. So I know that, like, there's really good persistence in great consumer products, and those companies, by the way, produce unbelievable cash flow.
Mm.
I was looking at this. It's shocking. It is shocking how stable, predictable. Look, Warren Buffett, look at his holdings, right?
Mhm.
He's got big investments in consumer products companies. And the last part on this mix is it goes by a bunch of different names, but impact is kind of the heading, and the subheadings would be climate or sustainability, depending upon what your view is of am I investing to take plastic out of the environment? Am I investing in clean energy production? But I think that's the fourth big pillar or theme for the next decade. The business, like, you can't go invest in the public markets today aside from buying Tesla and a handful of other companies with like, I've got a strong sustainability or climate thesis, but it is coming. And I think of all of the others, this one poses the big existential threat. Like, is our planet going to be livable 100 years from now or not?
I'm taking notes. If we can't live on this planet 100 years from now, why are we building flying cars or like some other stuff? But anyway, so I wanted to know more about like, I know that you guys invest in a broad range of sectors as well as like a broader range of stages of companies. Um I guess from creating a successful fund perspective, like what's your thinking framework in terms of, from like, the edge from like sourcing to picking to winning an exit? How, like, what's your evaluation process on like how much Greycroft's like, team is going to focus on, like, let's say the four factor or like the four sector you mentioned, like software and life sciences and or like consumer product to impact investing? I guess how do you focus on your energy and resources in these different bracket? And at like in which sector would you emphasize with like larger amount of capital for later stage versus earlier stage? How do you kind of like
Mm.
allocate your time and resources?
So first off, I think, and this is the Greycroft book, so I don't know if this works for everybody, but the way we think about our business is a platform.
Mhm,
And that means that ultimately these are not all one business.
mhm,
So software, and we don't do life sciences today. We do sustainability with Coca-Cola systems. I'll use those two as kind of the A and B.
mhm,
So the software team, we've got an investment team focused on software. They're responsible for sourcing, picking, winning, scaling, right?
mhm.
Excuse me. We have
Oh,
a
you're
similar team
mhm,
on sustainability. The two funds have their own LP base. There will in the future likely be some overlap, but they have their own LP base. They have their own investment mandate. They have their own strategy for deploying capital. Um, and this ranges from, we think that seed is better in this category versus that category. We think that there's more growth opportunity. It is all highly customized based upon the theme. And I think that is, in my opinion, the right way to do this, because if it's all together, you end up with a big hodgepodge merge of stuff, and it's hard to drive outlier performance
mm,
because it's not consistent. So that's the view at a high level, is like specialization and focus. We believe will produce better long-term performance. Like, this is
mm,
new for us, right? We just launched sustainability last year, but
mhm,
that's the general idea. As it relates specifically to like, how do we pick or how do we source? So, uh, like most venture firms, it's somewhat dependent upon stage.
mhm,
Um, the very, very early stage of the business. And I'll skate over to software for a minute. So in that domain, most of these companies are not identifiable as companies. If you're going to do seed investing in technical founders out of Facebook AI research,
mhm,
they don't have a LinkedIn profile that says, "Hey, I'm starting a company." And by the time they do, they've already been funded.
mm,
So this is heavy, heavy networking, inbound, understanding who key researchers are. And like, the outbound portion would be putting yourself at the center of the right ecosystem. But once you've done that, you've got to do a little bit of dynamite fishing. Like, that there's a lot of interesting talent in this
mhm,
market.
mhm,
And then you build a brand for yourself, and then they come to you.
Mm.
As companies progress,
Mhm.
that motion on sourcing shifts from inbound to outbound. So it's like
Mm.
making sure we have met with the companies that matter as early as possible in the categories that we're excited about.
Mm.
And we do that with, like, at the end of the day, the partners are ultimately responsible for this. But it's
Mm.
a lot of work to get quality meetings with high quality people because they're busy. And on picking, I think this is where venture has a scale problem. So picking, in my opinion, is not the type of thing that you can learn to do quickly. It takes a lot of repetition and a lot of time. Uh, and our view is that, unlike many others, if I had to take like two extreme models,
Mhm.
one is what I would call like the pod shop model, which in public equities, you have a bunch of small teams working together and you push picking all the way out to a single person at the edge. And the other model is the hive mind, which would be more
Mhm.
like a Bridgewater, but you bring all the ideas in and then a small group of people do the picking. We're more like the hive mind. So
Mm.
our view is, take all the information we can. There are ultimately 5 partners on the software fund. I'm one of those 5, and we make the decisions together.
Mm.
And really wrestle down, because this is hard. The hardest part, I think, is actually the picking. After having so many reps, and it's so hard because you look in hindsight like, oh, I should have done that deal. But with the
Mm.
information you had at the time, was it really obvious? And the answer is no, it is not obvious. And then you say, well, wait, what should we have known to have made a better decision? And then you try to continually reinvent that process to get better.
Mm. Okay, so what goes into the picking part? Like you mentioned the reps. So like it means like assuming you just pick like over like 200 times and or like something like that. So it's a numbers game vibe thing. But like if the um like basically if the picking is done by 5 people, how do you kind of like grow your investing team's like ability to train the next generation talent? Like how do you like I guess like how do you put together the 5 people and like what are like also like I guess like between like there's like some people are great investor, but they have no team. Like I've seen like living in Silicon Valley, I've seen a lot of like people becoming emerging managers, either leaving a big fund, starting their own shop, or like just younger people. They were able to convince people to give them money. Like they become a um emerging manager. And I wonder, when you're looking at like so like I don't think a lot of people are having their mind on like building a successful fund, but obviously like based on what I have observed you guys do from like the public perspective, I feel like you're trying to build like a next generation like amazing fund, right? So I wonder how do you kind of like pick the talent and then like train them, and then what goes into the reps of picking a good company, and like how do you kind of study
Yeah.
the company to make sure that they're like good throughout?
uh, so first off, we pick in public. So
Mhm,
like the 5 partners plus the rest of the software investment team, we sit together.
mhm,
Um, And I think that's really important. Not all firms do this because they tend, like, there's some level of confidentiality and security in a
mhm,
smaller group, but we push to have more people on the investment team in the room so they can learn and understand like what goes into the pick. I think the second thing is um, really being truthful, and by that I mean, when you look back, not there's something called resulting, which is this worked, therefore it was a good decision.
mm,
This didn't work, therefore it was a bad decision. And actually looking to see, like, at the time I picked, knowing what I knew, would I make the same decision again? And what would I have needed to know to make a different decision? And then why didn't I ask that question? And I think that's how you refine institutional processes to turn
mhm,
something that is highly individualized into something that is repeatable and consistent. because the overarching challenge in venture industry
Mhm.
wide is while there is persistence in top managers, that persistence is usually driven by brand, reputation, sourcing. It is not one level deeper necessarily driven by, wow, this person and their institutional processes they built are so strong that the next person after them is going to have a high degree of success, and we're really confident that that person is going to be a good picker too. And I think we're investing a lot here as a firm to try to institutionalize some of these processes to drive better decision making. And as it pertains to kind of the next leadership at Greycroft and how we hire and think about hiring, this is also changing a bit. I'm spending a lot of time thinking about software at the moment because
Mhm.
that's the one vertical within kind of the broader Greycroft ecosystem where I'm spending most of my time.
Mhm.
And in software, we had this 20-year golden age. And I don't think people appreciate this enough. But as an investor, we took zero, and I mean zero technology risk. There was never a question when an entrepreneur pitched us, could she build this product or not?
Mm.
Would it work? And the answer is you can build anything in software, right? Like you're demoing something in Figma or whatever,
Mhm.
converting that into code and having it run in the cloud, that was not a risky endeavor. And then getting that, you know, experience shrunk to a small screen, that is just UI. And that meant for 2 decades, all we had to do was try to figure out, can this team execute? So we focused on operational risk. And two, who's going to win the market and is the market big enough? So a lot of analysis around market sizing, expert references into large companies to try to understand whether or not this specific company we're looking at has a high probability of winning a space.
Mm.
And the companies that were the investment firms that were really good at that, they tended to hire people who were liberal arts majors, who were trained as investors, who would organize information. They were not particularly technical because that skill set was not necessary to be a really good software investor for a very long period of time. The new paradigm is back to technology risk. And we are evaluating companies today that are really research heavy. And will this software actually work? Can you convert this research into a model that produces a better outcome than the state of the art? That's hard. And that's not what a lot of software investors have historically done. So with our time and effort, like we're revisiting certain ideas. I on LinkedIn, I have a job description out. I should do an advertisement for Greycroft while I'm on the podcast, but I have a job description out for a senior associate who will be working with me in New York. And for the first time, we said, STEM degree from an undergrad, very specifically. And we want people who can sit and write a Python script. I mean, I don't need somebody who has invented the next neural network, but I need somebody who can understand how software is written, composed, designed, is comfortable reading an academic paper because we're taking more technology risk now than we were before.
Um, I wonder, like, how do you imagine them doing diligence? Yesterday, actually, this is a really interesting topic because yesterday I had Shaq from Lux Venture on, and then like I
Mhm.
literally asked him the same question because his perspective is like, because he come from the research background, he is a PhD, and he was talking about like, actually, in fact, like he think like people with no technical skill is better to source, or like better to like win in this category because of they could ask the right question, or like they know things that they don't know. But like for people with technical background, they just assume they know everything. But I wonder what's your thought on like, this technical person. I mean, I don't want to butcher his idea. Like people
Well,
should go
I
only
feel
read
like
product.
that's
Yeah.
kind of a generalization. because I know plenty of people without a technical background who think they know everything too. So I wouldn't generalize that to be broadly true. One of the things we look for, that you can call it humility or you can just call it self-awareness, is an understanding that you in fact don't know everything. Because right now in AI, nobody really knows anything. When you start asking questions and you start like why, it gets you see like this is turtles all the way down. The theory is not supposed to work this way, and yet empirically it does work a certain way, and it's massively scaled, and voila, something comes out the other side that you don't know until you test.
Mm. I
And
wonder, yeah,
go ahead. So
sorry, yeah.
like I mean, there's a probability that people who are trained in classical science, like neuroscience, may be better AI engineers than people with a theoretical computer science background, because as a scientist, you know how to like create studies, and you're in the lab actually reducing or changing, going from theory into practice, and that motion in AI is very valuable right now.
Mm. What are like, so you mentioned like this person have to know how to write Python script and software composed compose software. And I wonder like what are like, so what would you want the person to do to like, I guess like evaluate the best like AI company, and what is a play for like AI in your eye? Like, what are
Mm.
the subsectors that are interesting, as well as like how would you approach like to win the generation of like AI investing?
Um, so, a big question. Um, we're spending time today in both the infrastructure and in the application layer,
Mhm,
and there's some convergence there, because
mhm,
some of the application companies like OpenAI are application and infra, obviously. Uh, so um, you ask the question, what do I want this person to do? And I think what we're trying to solve for here, particularly in the early stage side, is one, getting into the right room. So
mhm,
understanding talent, the quality of the research, watching where talent is going, validating that a 25-year-old recent PhD graduate with 3 papers who has run some experiments is in fact the best person in the world at X, because that's really important
mm,
uh, as we're thinking about assembling teams to go after this space. So that's kind of one part of the work. I
mhm,
think the second part of the work is, and this is some pattern recognition, but saying, okay, there's 20 companies in and around a category. Which one's going to be the outlier with a very small amount of information that we can gather? And then trying to understand and probe as to why. Like, let's say you had 20 companies, they're all doing $1 million of ARR. They've all got a handful of enterprise accounts. Historically, that one of those 20 companies is going to break out and take 60 to 70% of the entire market cap of the whole space.
mhm,
At least we think that's the case, because we'll have
mhm,
done some work on the background. Trying to figure out why is oftentimes a mix of team. So back to like who are the best engineers and how they're going to innovate, and two, getting pretty deep into product roadmap to say like, okay, like this market's going to go this way, but the near adjacencies are A, B, C, and who's got the best probability of roadmap thought process behind how you get from here all the way to there. And there's a lot of examples of this going through my mind, but like a New York company like Datadog started in a pretty narrow niche, and over time has expanded to do a lot. And
mm,
I think successful software companies, they really target a customer profile, they'll super serve it, and then they'll figure out like, wow, this person, I can scale with them across a myriad of products if I keep building on top of my infrastructure. But you have to make early decisions that are right on the way you architect and build your infrastructure in order to enable you to have the option to do the next few things. And like if you analyze those 20 companies, you have to get into that level of granularity to figure out the answer to the question.
Mm. I want to like learn more about like so when you're thinking about differentiation for your team versus like the Silicon Valley. I think the Silicon Valley VC fund, their team is like full of, let's say, like the former machine learning engineer at Meta and Stanford PhD by people. And what's your thought on like getting the best talent as well as like winning the best deals? Because I think in the end of the day there is identifying, there's also winning. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I think I said this earlier, but I don't spend a ton of time thinking about what other people are doing.
Mm,
I do think a lot about how we can operate better and at a higher level at Greycroft. There's a certain advantage to being small and nimble, and for us, having a small group of investors, and I say relatively small, I mean, this is large to some people, but you've got a dozen investors focused on AI and software, and the ability for all of us to pick up tomorrow and fly somewhere because we think there's an interesting business that needs the time and attention and the 12 eyes on it, like 24 eyes, I suppose.
mhm,
You can do that. I think that at bigger firms that are trying to do many things at once in a single fund product, they just don't get the teamwork dynamic the same way. And I do think that's really important. And I think the second thing that's important, and I want to convey this the right way, but Dana and I started Greycroft together with Alan,
mhm,
but 18 years ago. And when we sit across the table from a founder, there is a certain shared experience about having 20 years building a company,
mhm,
and having to, in our case, do certain things like raise a fund to make payroll and to expand. Like I've been
mhm,
there. I've done a lot. And
mhm,
I think, and I'm still running the business that I founded.
mhm,
Most of the people that we find ourselves competing with did
mhm,
not, in fact, found the firms that they're currently at.
mhm,
And that's just a different dynamic. So, it's we're in a unique space with that regard because we're both young, relatively. I used to be
mhm.
really young. Like 18 years later, I'm not as young as I was, but relatively young, with decades of experience in venture, sitting at the intersection of a new trend, but also having founded the firm. Like there's a couple people that fit that pattern, but not very many.
Mm. So I wonder, when you are thinking about your personal unfair advantage, what would you identify as your like superpower? Are you like a strong salesperson, or are you like a technical like person, or like how do you identify yourself in terms of your strengths?
Um, I think it's probably three things. One is I am a relentless builder. So, yeah, if I wasn't building Greycroft, I'd be building something else. Uh, and I don't sit still very long. I'm not particularly complacent letting things happen to me if I can get out in front and help craft the narrative.
Mhm,
So whether that's been Greycroft, which I've been building for 2 decades,
mhm,
or the business I started before Greycroft, or even when I was in high school, it's always been building. I think the second thing is probably grit. Like venture is a hard business, right?
mhm,
And there's a lot of really smart people out there, and they all work really hard. Um, so like my personal story, like I played sports in college and I was the 8 man
mhm,
on a crew team, which is like the worst seat on the boat. You get splashed constantly. And crew is, by the way, like the grittiest sport of gritty sports. And I did that marathon running, but I'm able to push myself pretty hard. And I think the entrepreneurs, when we sit down and talk to them, they understand that they're getting a partner that's going to work as hard as they work.
Mm,
And there's a commitment there because you call me at 2 o'clock in the morning when things aren't working, and they know that I'm going to pick up the phone and I'm going to try my best to help. And by the time the morning comes around, I'll have thought through the problem and I may even have a plan. And they don't get somebody on the other side who's like, I don't know what to do with this information. Like they're getting somebody who's a problem solver who's going to try their best to help their company succeed. And we work like with the company's best interest at heart. So that's the second. And I think the third thing, I don't know how to like frame this, but it's like collecting and connecting dots.
mhm,
So, like, if I think about all of the experiences I've had, I started in venture in 2001.
mhm,
And my first role was life sciences and drug development companies and optical switches, semiconductors. And then I did media and enterprise software and financial services and some healthcare. But this constellation, I think, enables you to see what worked in one domain and how it can be applied to the next domain, how it can be applied to the next domain. And whether it's business building or I don't know, even like this marketing technique has worked over here. Has it? Have you thought about applying this into a totally different domain? It feels like the best VCs, like Michael Moritz and other people who I aspire to be someday, like
mm,
they have the ability to cross pollinate and take ideas from Google to Klarna to Instacart, which are like totally dissimilar businesses, but understanding how the web works and the connective tissue all works.
mm. I wonder what's your thought on like, because of I saw based on your portfolio, I feel like you have invested in like insurance tech, you have an insurance you have invested in like in fintech in like different kind of software companies. Um what do you identify as like I don't want to say like undervalued opportunity, but like what do you see as like the next generation big wave coming from? We chat about the sectors, the four sector that you're passionate about, but I think like, I guess like what is like do you think like investing in AI would be like a sustainable investing strategy to pursue like basically becoming an expert at? Like I feel like each firm when you're or like young investor when you're establishing yourself, you probably have to pick a sector to become like a super expert in. I wonder when you are looking at the different kind of sectors, what do you think is a best time invested in that particular sector?
Um, well, uh, I think let me play the question back to make sure I understand this.
Okay.
So, if you're joining a Greycroft and you're trying to make a name for yourself here, versus I want to be a solo GP and start my own fund, there's a divergent series of things that those two people have to contemplate.
Mm,
So, uh, in the latter camp, if you want to build your own venture capital firm, I'd be concerned that the positioning would be a straitjacket if you're too narrow.
mm,
And that you have to think through what that means and what you want to do. But
mhm,
if you go and raise capital to do this little thing, it has to be expansive enough that you can step over time because that little thing is likely to be smallish at the moment and it won't be the key trend, I promise you, 20 years from now. It may be the key trend right now. And then within Greycroft, as we think about hiring people, part of what makes working here special is like we're trying to be super learners. It's like how do
mhm,
you learn something really well, really fast, and make sure that you're on top of key trends. Um, and then how do you take that information, disseminate it, come to conclusion, and get back to the team, and then move to the next big idea that we're spending time on in 2 quarters. And I'll give you like a quick example. I don't know anything about
mhm,
quantum computing. Nothing.
mhm,
You could you could ask me, and my depth of knowledge is about 1 inch. I'm very interested in quantum computing. And what I can tell you is, and with no degree of certainty, that sometime between 2 years from now and 200 years from now, we are going to have quantum computers, and that those quantum computers will replace all conventional computers. And if the answer is 2 years from now, that has dramatic implications for NVIDIA and a bunch of other things. If the answer is 200 years from now, we're all dead. So, like, in between that, though, there's a lot of stuff that's going to be built and happen, how the infrastructure will work and the software. And oh, by the way, this is why this is so interesting to me. And I want to give you like just the high level stat. There were like the first qubit computer is probably 2 decades old. And they got to 10. And then most recently, Harvard University and some others in December published a study. They got to 40 qubits, which is like a big number for qubits, small number because you can count it. But the computational power of 80 qubits, which is like, seems like a close-ish number, it gets something called quantum supremacy, where like a quantum computer can do everything a regular computer can do and a lot more. And from that point forward, quantum computing is better forever. So we're like getting close between 40 and 80. At 200 qubits, which is also like linearly not that far away from 40. This may take us another 200 years as a civilization to get there, but like 200 qubits, there are more equivalent states, like transistor states, than there are atoms in the universe. Contemplate that for a minute. Like, what happens? Because like overnight, everything will change once this technology gets there. So that's as much as I know about quantum computing. But like, we're trying to get super smart on it, because if it's 2 years from now, a bunch of things are going to happen. You're best positioned to have a handful of interesting software bets on quantum algorithms. And you might have heard Jensen at BTC talk about how people are doing quantum emulation on H100. Like, getting up to speed on this, we'll get there in 3 weeks, because we'll talk to a lot of people. We'll create a research product. We'll think about it. And then we'll make a decision about, like, do we play this now? Do we put it in our back pocket and revisit it in 12 months? But like, the benefit of being at Greycroft, back to where I started this whole quantum randomness, is that you get the ability to do deep dives into things that are really interesting from a platform that can fund them and help usher in the next wave of innovation. And it is never boring.
I like that. Like, you mentioned in an interview 3 years ago, you mentioned about like mining asteroid, and now you're mentioning like quantum computing. I wonder. So like, I guess like
we did not fund any companies that were mining asteroids, if that was your question.
yeah. No, I don't think you funded anything. You were talking about like, some other people looking at it or something.
Yeah.
But I mean, in fact, I was looking at it yesterday, but like, anyway. So I wonder, when you're thinking about these like big tech trends. So basically, you're saying, if you're a solo GP trying to start your own fund, you probably have to go broad-ish. And then, but if you're in like a big place like Greycroft, like, or I wouldn't say call it big place, but like compared to the solo GPs, you're very big, right? So like. And then also, you guys are very successful fund, but you were trying to highlight that the investment decisions are made by like 5 people, so I don't want to call it big. So like, so basically, you're saying like, if you're at a bigger place, maybe you should focus on double down on particular subsector, and then like, or like doing deep dive into these like different sub sectors. I guess like, how would you, when you're mentioning about like timing, it's also something really interesting and important. Let's say the next like 12 months, where do you identify as the biggest opportunity? And yeah, or what are something that interesting that you've seen recently that you feel like you have been spending a lot of time on besides quantum computing?
Oh, well, that happened to be the flavor of the week. So we'll I don't know if that's interesting or not. I'll let you know in 2 more weeks when we get to the bottom of it. So I mean, stuff that's of the moment that like undeniably going to happen is through the course of 2024, there's a lot of emphasis on what would be called like Copilot application or some companion application. So we're trying to figure out like who owns and distributes these into the enterprise based upon kind of the end persona and what has to be built. Because if I'm a bond trader at a bank, my Copilot application would be taking all of Bloomberg and running it from a command line with kind of really distinctive workflow about what I'm looking for 24/7 and how it all works. And it may not even be possible to do this. And Bloomberg might, because I'm chatting so much, it's a social network in addition to being a research platform. Maybe it's just I can't get off of Bloomberg no matter what happens, and Bloomberg owns it, or maybe there's somebody else. Or context shift. I run a hospital system, and I'm trying to figure out if I'll do care management and coordination with people or Judy the AI bot. Like we think that certain domains are going to be faster adopters with higher time to value and totally different technical needs. So scoping the universe and trying to understand that is kind of part and parcel of our work for 2024. And we're spending a lot of time on that in the application layer. So that's kind of one thing. I'd say the second thing is getting into the infrastructure about how these models work and what's coming down the pipe. There's still a lot of research in how to scale LLMs and other sorts of generative AI without consuming so much energy and so much expense in compute cycles. So we're spending time in that domain. We're spending time in, as enterprises start to roll out these products, how do I know that there's not being code injected or prompt engineering to get, Ford Motor Company to give me free cars, right? Because they're going to launch something somewhere, and people are going to descend upon it. And the minute somebody figures out how to social engineer the AI to start giving away free stuff, I promise you in real time, a lot of people will jump on top of it. So the current infrastructure behind LLMs is not really set up well to do real-time, low latency application performance monitoring management. So that's one of 50 different things that we're thinking about. How does that work in production?
How do you, how do you research a subject? Let's say if today robotic company come to you, let's say they're building robot for, I don't know, delivering food at a restaurant or something like that. How do you kind of quickly study that industry? Of course, they're going to say it's using AI, in, I don't know, in 2030 or 2040, every restaurant is going to have this robot. How would you go ahead and study this industry? And then what are some benchmarks that you'll be using to evaluate if this is a good deal? And then if there's any potential exit strategy for that company?
Okay. So I first principles. Can I fund and stay at the table at a robotics company or not? That would be my very first question. And I would guess that given the amount of CapEx in building physical robots, I would quickly run out of my ability to fund that business. It may not matter because there may be enough downstream money from strategics and others that I don't have to worry. But I'd have to evaluate that first off as a yes, no, is this something that I can play within my bankroll? And then if the answer is no, then it gets into a second bucket of does that matter or not? Will there be other sources of capital to make sure that this company is long-term successful? And that's a pretty narrow slice of the robotic puzzle.
Mhm.
That would be the first thing I would think about. Let's take robots off for a minute and talk about something that would be like, I don't know, something that we could actually fund all the way through that doesn't have like $20 billion of CapEx associated with it.
Mhm.
So, like a software
Mhm.
company, for instance, comes in, and I'm not worried about like, am I the right person to play the game or not?
Mhm.
Then the second question would be, um, depending upon stage, one, if it's very early, it would be a lot of team questions. So when I sit down with the founder for the first time, my conversation is usually like, I just want to get to know you. I want to understand
Mhm.
how you came here, what this, like, how you got to the idea. And you should understand me too, by the way. Like, if this is like, reference me, but like, we should really get, because this, if I end up investing in that company, it's like a 10-year marriage, maybe longer,
Mhm.
20 years. And I really do want to get to know people up front, because
Mhm.
in the long term, the best teams generally win. We had David Stern, former commissioner of the NBA, as an advisor,
Mhm.
and his refrain constantly is, "Ian, talent is destiny." So like, a lot of time focused on the talent in the company, particularly early on. And then, depending upon what they're doing, the next question is like, will it actually work? Which is, this AI question.
Mhm.
And then, what's the market look like? Is this a market that's going to have a big enough upside for our kind of mutual ambition?
Mm.
But those, there's like a series of, if I think about like a decision tree, right?
Mhm.
And my goal as an investor, because like there's a lot of companies out there, is to get to either yes or no, but get to it as fast as I can. And I don't have a better method, unfortunately, than to have like certain gates along the way, because you
Mhm.
can't afford to go really, really deep on more, in my instance, more than 20 or 30 companies a year, because it just takes a couple weeks.
I wonder when you mentioned like talent is destiny, like, and then per to that, you mentioned like, the technical associate on your team should be able to figure out like who is like the best in class of X subject. I feel like being in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of technical talent we have seen. Like they could be like top three in like research paper writing. However, are they gonna be the top three in building a company? How do you kind of evaluate that?
Um, First off, we tend to fund teams,
Hmm.
uh, and moreover, underwrite teams. And people who are really good at building a company, like Ali at Databricks,
Hmm.
okay, very technical. Co-founders are very technical. Thinks with a scientific method about how to build the company. And I don't even know him. I've only listened to podcasts and understand like how he thinks about scaling a business. But you would have a very easy time referencing the suite of executives that he has surrounded himself with, who are all world class. And that is probably the best early signal of a CEO's ability to build something big. It's not, no company is built by a single person. And the very best founder I have personally worked with, and I was advised by compliance, like not to name names, but came to the first board meeting after we invested. And keep in mind, like, we didn't know each other that well yet. Like, the process was not that long. First board meeting, and said, I made a decision, and I've already started moving on it, but I need a totally new executive team, because these three people that I have running product, engineering, marketing are not the people that will get me to where I need to go. And I have already told them that I need to bring in better talent. And I've already gotten a recruiter. The board has to approve this, but I've already gotten a recruiter ready to go. And oh, by the way, I'm moving to San Francisco with my wife and kids. Like, whoa. But like, people people who think about their business this way. Like, I need a certain amount of talent to get to where I want to go, and have that kind of maniacal focus on the quality of the people that they're working with. Those people, even if they're very technical, tend to have good core business building abilities, and everything else I think can be taught.
I don't want to drag you into a longer conversation because I feel like I already kind of like ran this over because of the technical difficulty. But how does that team turn out, by the way? Like, are they like a unicorn now
No,
or
no,
like
we made a lot of money on that investment, but I can't talk about it. So it's like,
okay, that sounds good. Yeah, let's not talk
compliance
about
has
that.
me in like a. But yes, like
So it's a good investment. Yeah.
that pattern, generally speaking, really works.
Amazing. Okay, that's great to know. And well, Ian, like I still have so many questions for you, but I don't want to like drag you whole day into like sitting here with me. Why don't we end with like a 1 minute fire round?
Oh boy. Okay.
What's your favorite book?
Uh, Probably Ender's Game.
That's a good book. Who made the biggest impact in your career?
I think I already mentioned that Alan Patrikoff.
Mm. Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Who would I invite to a dinner party?
To your dinner party?
One person? Oh, uh, can I get anybody living? I mean,
It's your party.
I would say Barack Obama.
Okay. What are you guys gonna talk about?
A lot of things. I don't know, but if you're president of the United States for 8 years, you probably know a ton of stuff that would be super interesting. I don't know, we have
Uh,
a good conversation.
where can we find you outside of work?
We can find me outside on the soccer pitch.
Okay. Where can we find you on the internet? That's the last question.
Oh, you can find me on LinkedIn. How about we end with
Amazing.
that? Amazing.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ian, for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.